He thought he knew his wife until he discovered a name that wasn't hers. What secrets had she been hiding all these years, and who was the man that threatened to unravel everything tonight? One house will reveal the truth, and the life he believed in might be gone forever. The house looked calm from the street, the kind of place people slowed down to admire without knowing why. Daniel believed in appearances. He believed the quiet meant safety, that routine was proof of love. On Monday morning, exactly 1 week before everything collapsed, he stood in the kitchen watching his wife pour coffee like she always did, careful, measured, smiling at the wrong moments. They called it a perfect week later. Friends would say that word as if it explained something. Birthdays had passed, bills were paid, the marriage, at least on paper, was intact. Daniel felt lucky in a cautious way, the way people do when happiness seems fragile enough to shatter if acknowledged out loud. His wife, Mara, moved through the house with gentle precision. She remembered appointments before he did. She finished his sentences. She touched his arm when she wanted reassurance and withdrew when questions got too close. Daniel told himself that intimacy didn't need explanations. Trust, after all, was built on silence as much as truth. There were signs, though small ones, that didn't fit. A phone turned face down on the counter. A pause before answering simple questions. Laughter that arrived half a second too late. Daniel noticed these things and then dismissed them, because marriage taught him to edit his own instincts. On Wednesday night, they ate dinner in front of the television, knees barely touching. Mara laughed at something that wasn't funny. Daniel watched her reflection in the dark screen more than the show itself. For a moment, he felt like a guest in his own life, observing a woman who knew she was being watched. By Thursday, the feeling hardened into discomfort. He began replaying conversations in his head, searching for missteps that belonged to him. Had he stopped listening? Had love thinned into habit? The questions gnawed quietly, the way doubt always does before it learns to scream. Friday came with rain and an early sunset. Daniel arrived home before Mara, something that rarely happened. The house felt different without her, lighter and emptier at the same time. He wandered through rooms as if checking for damage after a storm, unsure what he expected to find. In the bedroom, her phone buzzed on the nightstand. He didn't touch it. He didn't need to. The screen lit up just enough to show a name he didn't recognize, paired with a message that made no sense in the context of their life together. Daniel stood there longer than he realized, listening to the rain hit the windows, understanding only one thing with certainty. Whatever this week was, it was not perfect. And whatever he was about to learn had already been waiting for him. He thought about asking her, rehearsing calm questions, imagining ordinary answers. Instead, he felt the first shift inside himself, a tightening he couldn't name. The lie, whatever shape it took, pressed against the walls of the house. When the front door finally opened downstairs, Daniel didn't move. He stayed still, phone buzzing again, realizing the week had chosen him, and it would not let go. Above him, footsteps paused, then turned, as if someone sensed the balance breaking, unaware that discovery had already begun. And silence was about to become dangerous inside their carefully arranged life together. Daniel couldn't stop staring at the screen. The name glowed faintly in the dim bedroom light, Lena Whitaker. It wasn't familiar. It didn't belong. He blinked, shook his head, convinced he was imagining things. Mara's phone sat between them like a third person in the room, quietly accusing, quietly waiting. He remembered asking her, weeks ago, about an old friend, someone she said she had lost touch with. She had smiled, a little too quickly, and changed the subject. Now he wondered if every memory he had of her was edited, rehearsed, intentionally incomplete. His chest tightened. The idea that he didn't really know her began to anchor itself in his mind. Daniel started digging carefully, flipping through messages, dates, and contacts, as if his fingers could extract the truth by touch alone. Lena Whitaker's name repeated across old chats, long before he and Mara had met. The words seemed innocuous at first, birthday wishes, polite check-ins, but something about the tone, the hidden pauses between them, set his teeth on edge. This was a story that didn't include him, a life that had existed without his knowledge. He recalled Mara's peculiar habit of leaving her phone unlocked, but only at certain times. The phone now felt like a window, not a tool. and every notification was a whisper about a past she had carefully hidden. She had been meticulous, Daniel realized, crafting a life he thought was shared, when in reality it was borrowed, rehearsed, incomplete. The thought made him shiver. How long had she been lying? How many details of her past had been smoothed over to protect whom? And why? The questions multiplied faster than answers could arrive. His trust, which had been steadfast, now seemed fragile and brittle, like glass perched on the edge of a counter. Daniel's mind flicked to their conversations. How many times had she answered vaguely, smiled at just the right moment, or laughed when she shouldn't have? Each moment that had seemed intimate now carried the weight of suspicion. He could hear her voice echoing in the kitchen, warm and familiar, but now each syllable felt layered, double-coated, impossible to read. He paused on a message from Lena Whitaker. "Remember what we promised, keep it safe." Daniel's heart slammed against his ribs. Promised, safe. The words were deliberately ambiguous, but the meaning hit him like ice water. There was something she had deliberately kept hidden, something so significant it had shaped the life he thought was theirs together. Daniel paced the living room, phone in hand, a storm of thoughts colliding. A life without secrets now felt impossible to trust. Shadows from the past pressed into the present, turning ordinary walls into witnesses of unseen actions. He realized he was only scratching the surface. At that moment, Mara returned, keys jingling softly in the hallway. She entered, smiling, carrying the groceries that would later feel insignificant. Daniel froze, phone in his hand and something in her posture. Just a fraction too tense, a flicker in her eyes, made him question everything once again. He swallowed hard, forcing a calm that wasn't there. The name on the phone had changed the rules of their marriage. Nothing would ever feel ordinary again. And in that quiet, charged pause, Daniel understood one painful truth. The person he thought he knew was a stranger. As Mara unpacked the bags, Daniel glanced again at the message, and a chilling thought formed. If this life existed before him, then the lies he was beginning to uncover were only the beginning. Somewhere hidden in her past, the real story waited. And when it revealed itself, Daniel realized it might not be a story he could survive. Cliffhanger, a drawer in the bedroom, previously ignored, suddenly caught Daniel's attention. Something inside promised answers, or perhaps even danger, and he knew that opening it would change everything. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened the drawer. Inside lay a small, unassuming box, its surface worn and unremarkable. Yet he could feel the weight of it before even touching it, as if the object itself held the pulse of a hidden life. Papers, old photographs, and letters filled the space, carefully stacked but revealing fragments of a story that Mara had spent years concealing. He hesitated, then lifted the top photo, a younger Mara standing beside a man he didn't recognize. The smile on her face was genuine, but the eyes held a secret. Every photograph told a version of her life that never included him. Birthday parties, vacations, and ordinary days all belonged to a person he had never met. One letter, yellowed with age, was addressed to Lena Whitaker, thanking her for keeping a promise, for understanding when things needed to remain hidden. Daniel felt the room shrink, as if the walls were closing in to witness his discovery. Questions tumbled in his mind, unbidden and relentless. How could he have missed this? Every memory he had shared with Myra now seemed stitched over a void. He recalled the late-night phone calls she would hide from him, the pauses in her laughter, the sudden changes in topics. What he had assumed were quirks of personality were pieces of careful choreography. Daniel's pulse quickened. He flipped through more photographs, noticing subtle differences in dates and locations. One image, a birthday party with confetti and candles, was marked just a week before he had first met her. The realization hit him like a physical blow. She had been living a parallel life. She had hidden not just a name, but a history, a network of people, experiences, and relationships that had nothing to do with him. The room seemed suddenly too quiet. Outside, the late afternoon sun filtered through the blinds, casting thin stripes across the floor. Daniel could almost hear the soft whisper of the house itself, pressing him to acknowledge the truth he had been avoiding. He sat down on the edge of the bed, letters and photos spilling around him like evidence in a courtroom he had never agreed to enter. He remembered the message on her phone, the one that mentioned promises and safety. Now it made sense. The promises weren't to him. The life she had led before their marriage had rules, obligations, and secrets that had been carefully maintained. And somehow, he had been living in the margin, a character in someone else's carefully edited story. Daniel's thoughts drifted to the moments that had once felt ordinary. Their first vacation together, the small traditions they had created, the quiet evenings on the couch. He realized that each had been selected, curated, filtered to maintain the illusion of intimacy. The betrayal wasn't immediate or violent. It was slow, subtle, psychological. It seeped into the walls, into the laughter, into the silence between them. His heart sank deeper with every new detail he uncovered. The truth was not a single act. It was a lifetime of acts hidden behind a smile. And with that realization came a chilling understanding. He had never truly known her. Daniel stood and gathered the letters, photographs, and documents, holding them as if they were both fragile and dangerous. He couldn't ignore what he had found, nor could he confront it immediately without preparing himself. The first lie had been uncovered, but he suspected it was only the beginning. He glanced toward the bedroom door, hearing the soft hum of Mara's music from the other room. She was unaware, still moving through her carefully maintained life. Daniel's mind raced, knowing that the next step would require confrontation, courage, and a reckoning that could destroy everything. The room felt heavier now, as if the air itself carried the weight of truths yet to be revealed. Cliffhanger, Daniel tucked a photograph into his pocket, one that might answer questions or provoke dangerous revelations. He knew the next discovery could change their marriage forever. Daniel's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he had found. Mara's life, the one she had carefully curated, was slowly revealing its architecture. Each memory he once cherished now felt like a calculated move in a game he hadn't realized he was playing. Love, he realized, had never been spontaneous. It had always been strategic, timed, measured, and designed to control what he saw and what he didn't. He replayed recent weeks in his head, searching for patterns. The way she asked questions about his day, the pauses before her laughter, even the gestures of affection, all now seemed deliberate. Daniel felt a shiver crawl up his spine. What had he thought was intimacy was a series of rehearsed performances, crafted to shape his perception. The warmth he had felt in her arms was tainted by manipulation, a tool to keep him from questioning, from noticing the gaps in her narrative. By Saturday evening, the tension in the house was palpable. Daniel sat in the living room, surrounded by Mara's photographs and letters, trying to piece together the timeline of a life that had nothing to do with him. Outside, the wind rattled the windows, as if echoing the unrest he felt inside. He noticed details he had ignored before, the way she arranged objects, the way she left her phone partially visible, the subtle codes in her texts. Each action was intentional, and each had a purpose he was only beginning to grasp. The first confrontation between them came silently. Mara entered the room carrying a tray of tea, smiling as she always did. Daniel didn't speak immediately. Instead, he let her move, observing every small movement. Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second when she noticed his expression, but she masked it quickly, as if rehearsed. He realized then that she was as aware of his suspicions as he was unaware of the full extent of her life. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, her voice casual, carefully measured. Daniel didn't answer right away. He studied her, trying to read the micro-expressions he had missed before. "I've been noticing things," he said slowly, carefully choosing his words. "Things that don't add up." Mara paused, placing the tray on the table with deliberate calm. "And what things would those be?" she asked, eyes locked on his. Her tone was gentle, but there was an undercurrent, a quiet warning, a hint that she was ready for this conversation on her own terms. Daniel swallowed hard, aware that he was entering a psychological battlefield. Every word he spoke, every question he asked would need precision. This was no longer about love. It was about understanding, about seeing the rules of a game he hadn't known he was playing. The conversation revealed little, but it changed everything. The dynamic between them shifted subtly. He was no longer a participant in her choreography, but an observer aware of its structure. The distance between them grew, not because of anger, but because awareness had changed the rules of engagement. By the time Mara left the room, Daniel's mind was a storm. He realized the strategic nature of their relationship was not a single lie, but a pattern. A lifetime of choices designed to conceal and protect a hidden truth. The challenge now was understanding the extent of her strategy without losing himself entirely. Cliffhanger, as he turned back to the letters and photographs scattered across the room, one envelope slipped from the pile, falling open to reveal a name he had not seen before. Someone intimately connected to Mara's past, had entered the story, and Daniel felt a chill he could not shake. Daniel stared at the envelope, his fingers frozen above the paper. The name written in careful, precise handwriting made his stomach twist. Evan Crawford. He had never heard it before, yet it felt like a thread that could unravel everything. Mara's past was no longer a shadow. It had taken shape, tangible and threatening, and Evan Crawford seemed to be at its center. He opened the envelope slowly, careful not to tear the thin paper. Inside were photographs, documents, and a series of letters. Each one carried a story he had no right to know, a life parallel to the one he had been living with Mara. Evan was not just a friend, not just a figure in her history. He was someone who had influenced her choices, guided her secrets, and perhaps dictated the rules she had followed even after meeting Daniel. Daniel felt the weight of betrayal settle deep in his chest. The life he had thought was shared, constructed with mutual trust and affection, now seemed like a stage, and he had been a mere actor. He rifled through the letters, noting references to promises, warnings, and debts, social, financial, emotional, that had nothing to do with him. Mara had been negotiating a hidden world behind the smile he trusted, balancing relationships he couldn't imagine, and protecting truths he had no access to. He remembered their conversations, the subtle shifts in tone, the careful avoidance of certain topics. Every omission suddenly made sense. Mara had built layers of protection around herself, hiding not just a name but a network, a life outside their marriage. Each memory of tenderness now carried an unspoken question. How much of her affection had been strategy, and how much genuine? The photographs of Mara and Evan told another story entirely. They were casual, domestic even, but there was intimacy in their gestures, familiarity in their smiles, a history of shared moments Daniel could never reach. The realization hit him hard. This was not a secret affair. It was a deep, formative connection that had shaped the woman he had married. Daniel's mind raced, trying to reconcile the Mara he knew with the Mara in the photographs. Could love and manipulation coexist? Could someone genuinely care for him while simultaneously hiding a life that had defined her choices long before he appeared? The answers eluded him, leaving only the gnawing ache of uncertainty. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the windows and adding a low, persistent hum to the room. Daniel's thoughts spiraled. If Evan Crawford was part of this, then every subtle tension, every coded message, every strategic move Mara had made suddenly had a purpose beyond the marriage. The house, once a sanctuary, felt like a cage constructed around secrets, each wall bearing witness to a life he had no claim to. Daniel took a deep breath and read one final letter. It was addressed to Mara, instructing her to maintain appearances, to keep promises, and above all, to protect herself at any cost. The tone was urgent but calm, commanding but careful. He realized this wasn't just about hiding, it was about survival. The stakes were far higher than he had imagined. He leaned back, the documents and photographs spread around him like evidence in a trial he hadn't agreed to. The emotional weight was suffocating, a mixture of awe, fear, and grief. One truth had led to another, and the chain was unbroken. The life he thought he knew was only a fragment of a much larger, more dangerous puzzle. Cliffhanger, Daniel's eyes fell on a photograph tucked beneath the others, Mara and Evan standing in front of a building he recognized, his own workplace. The image suggested that the secret he had uncovered was not just from the past. It was alive, present, and possibly affecting him now. Daniel couldn't shake the photograph. Mara and Evan standing in front of his workplace, smiling casually as if nothing mattered, yet everything did. He traced the edges of the frame with trembling fingers, trying to understand what it meant. 7 days. 1 week had passed since the first sign of a lie appeared, and now every moment of his life felt contaminated by the knowledge of her hidden world. The week had become a countdown. Each day, each hour, seemed to carry more weight, more implication. Daniel found himself retracing his steps, reviewing conversations, examining emails and texts, questioning the meaning of every smile and pause. The ordinary routines, the coffee on the counter, the way Mara left the blinds open in the morning, felt like coded messages he hadn't been trained to read. He started noticing subtle patterns. Certain times of day, her movements, even the way she hummed while cooking, everything felt deliberate. Daniel realized he was no longer interacting with Mara as a partner, but as a detective piecing together a puzzle designed to mislead him. Love had become observation. Intimacy had become investigation. By the third day, the psychological strain began to show. Sleep eluded him, replaced by restless pacing and silent conversations with himself. He replayed Mara's words, testing their meaning, examining the pauses, the inflections, the things she hadn't said. A single phrase, once overlooked, now carried layers of hidden intent. The house, once familiar and comforting, had become a labyrinth of deception. Daniel tried to act normal when Mara was around. He maintained the smiles, the casual touches, the seemingly effortless conversation. But inside, he was calculating, assessing, preparing for the moment when he could confront her, or at least understand the full extent of the secrets she had hidden. Every night he returned to the letters and photographs, laying them across the bed like pieces of evidence, searching for a pattern, a message, a clue that would make sense of it all. On the fifth day, he began keeping a record, a diary of anomalies. Every lie, every omission, every suspicious glance was cataloged meticulously. He noted times, locations, and emotional shifts. The act of writing made him feel in control, even as the reality of Mara's double life threatened to consume him. The diary became both a shield and a weapon, a way to map the battlefield he had unknowingly entered. By the seventh day, tension had reached a peak. Daniel felt like a coiled spring, every sense alert, every nerve raw with anticipation. Mara moved through the house with her usual grace, unaware, or perhaps aware, of the storm building inside him. Every glance she gave him seemed layered, every word measured, every gesture potentially meaningful. Daniel's reflection in the hallway mirror startled him. Eyes wide, jaw tense, shoulders stiffened. The man staring back at him was not the husband he remembered being. 7 days of scrutiny, suspicion, and revelation had aged him, hardened him, and reshaped him into someone who could no longer live in ignorance. He heard footsteps in the other room, soft, deliberate, and froze. Mara's presence was immediate, tangible, a living reminder that the secrets of the past were still active, still influencing the present. Daniel knew that the tipping point was near. One conversation, one decision could alter everything. The 7 days had brought clarity and danger in equal measure, and he understood with cold certainty that there was no turning back. Cliffhanger, the phone buzzed again, this time with a message that made the blood drain from Daniel's face. "We need to meet, tonight, alone." Evan Daniel stared at the phone, the message from Evan burning in his vision. "Alone, tonight." The words were simple, clinical even, but they carried a weight that pressed against his chest like a stone. He wanted to speak, to call Mara, to demand answers, but something held him back. What he didn't say, he realized, might be just as important as what he did. Every word now had consequences. Every silence could be a weapon. He paced the living room, running through scenarios. If he went, would he confront Evan, or would he be forced to defend himself? If he spoke to Mara, would he provoke her, risk her reaction? He understood with sudden clarity that silence was strategic. He had learned from her, albeit unwillingly. Observation, patience, measured moves. These were the rules of this dangerous game, and Daniel had no choice but to play by them. Mara appeared in the hallway, her hair tied back, a cup of tea in her hands. She smiled, that same calm, calculated expression that had once reassured him. But now it felt like a mask, hiding intentions he could no longer ignore. "You seem distant," she said softly, sliding the cup toward him. Her eyes searched his, trying to read him just as he had tried to read her for days. Daniel took the tea without speaking. Words would betray him. Every syllable carried risk. She didn't push, but he sensed the tension in her posture, the subtle tightening around her shoulders. She knew he was thinking, weighing, planning. The unspoken between them grew heavier, stretching the space like a taut wire. He thought back to the 7 days of scrutiny, the patterns he had cataloged, the letters and photographs, the envelope from Evan. What had once been trust was now suspicion, What had once been intimacy was now calculation. Every conversation was a minefield. Daniel understood that in action, choosing what not to say was a weapon he had finally learned to wield. Hours passed, each one dragging him closer to the meeting. Mara went about her evening with quiet grace, unaware or pretending to be unaware of the storm inside him. Daniel watched her, memorizing movements that had once been comforting, now charged with danger. He realized that the woman he loved, or thought he loved, had taught him a cruel lesson. Sometimes survival depended on what was left unsaid. As night fell, the house felt smaller, the shadows longer. Daniel's phone buzzed again, confirming the time and place for the meeting. He felt a cold pulse of fear and anticipation. Everything depended on what he chose to reveal and what he chose to conceal. One wrong word could unravel all he had learned, destroy the fragile understanding he had built in the past week. He set the phone down and looked at Mara one last time. Her eyes met his, and for a fraction of a second, the barrier of strategy faltered, revealing a flicker of something raw, regret, fear, or merely performance. Daniel could not tell. He gathered the letters, photographs, and diary he had kept, tucking them carefully into a bag. What he didn't say, he understood, could protect him, could give him an advantage, or could cost him everything. The house was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the refrigerator and the distant city outside. He realized that tonight would demand clarity, courage, and restraint beyond anything he had known. Cliffhanger, Daniel left the house, stepping into the night, heart pounding. The meeting with Evan awaited, and with it, truths Mara had buried and consequences he could not yet foresee. One step forward, and nothing would ever be the same. Daniel walked into the dimly lit cafe, the smell of coffee and rain mixing into a sharp, almost bitter tang. Evan was already there, seated in a corner, face partially obscured by shadows. Daniel felt his pulse accelerate, a mixture of fear, anger, and anticipation. This was the culmination of a week's worth of discoveries, doubts, and silent calculations. Every step had led to this moment, and he knew nothing would be the same afterward. Evan looked up, his eyes steady, assessing, as if he had expected Daniel all along. "You came," he said simply. His voice was calm, deliberate, carrying the weight of someone who understood consequences far better than Daniel ever had. Daniel sat, hands folded tightly on the table, trying to project control he didn't feel. "I need to know the truth," he said, voice low but firm. Every word he had withheld in the past week pressed against him, demanding release. Evan leaned back, studying him, weighing which truths should be revealed and which should remain hidden. "You've seen pieces," Evan began, his tone measured. "Pieces that aren't meant to make sense yet. Mara's life, it's complicated. Everything she's done, every lie, every omission was survival." Daniel's jaw tightened. "Survival or manipulation?" The words slipped out before he could stop them. He felt a jolt of regret, but it was too late. Evan's gaze sharpened, cutting through him. "Both," Evan admitted. "Love, loyalty, strategy, they all intertwine. You think you're betrayed, but she has been protecting herself, and in a way, you." Daniel froze, struggling to reconcile what he heard with what he knew. The cafe seemed to shrink, the walls pressing closer, shadows twisting with every flicker of light. Daniel felt a suffocating weight in his chest. He realized that in his obsession to uncover the truth, he had lost sight of the human stakes, the fear, the loyalties, the pressures Mara had faced. Yet the anger simmered, twisting like a live wire. Evan continued, "You've waited 7 days, observing, calculating. But there's a cost to knowing, Daniel. Every truth has a price. Every silence, every word withheld, it shapes outcomes you can't yet predict." Daniel's mind raced. Memories of Mara's gestures, her pauses, her hidden smiles, they were no longer ambiguous. He understood, painfully, that the woman he thought he knew had been navigating a complex world, balancing alliances and threats. And he had stepped into the center of it all, unprepared, vulnerable. The tension became unbearable, words that should have come out tangled in his throat. He realized the breaking point wasn't just about what he had learned, but what he felt. Betrayal, fear, love, and the overwhelming need to reclaim control. It was a psychological storm with no outlet. Daniel rose abruptly, chair scraping against the floor, drawing glances from other patrons. "I need to see her," he said, voice trembling but resolute. "I need answers from Mara herself. Not pieces, not intermediaries, tonight." Evan's lips curved faintly, a mixture of caution and understanding. "Be careful," he warned. "Once you confront her, nothing will be reversible. The moment you step into that house with that knowledge, every choice will carry consequences. You'll face truths, not fragments." Daniel nodded, swallowing hard, the weight of the week pressing down. Every heartbeat seemed amplified, the city outside muted, as if the world itself was holding its breath. Cliffhanger, as he left the cafe, rain beginning to fall in soft sheets, Daniel realized the house would no longer be a refuge. Tonight, confrontations would unfold, truths would collide, and the fragile line between love, betrayal, and violence would finally break. The breaking point was here, and nothing could stop what came next. Daniel's hands shook as he turned the key in the lock. The house smelled of damp wood and rain-soaked carpet, the familiar scent now alien, heavy with tension. Every shadow seemed longer than it should be, every corner a potential witness to the events he had been dreading all week. He stepped inside cautiously, aware that tonight, nothing would be ordinary again. Mara was in the kitchen, the light from the overhead fixture flickering slightly as she moved. She looked up, startled but composed, her expression a careful mask. Daniel noticed how her posture had changed over the past week, alert, guarded, almost rehearsed. He had seen her calculate and charm before, but now it was different. Now it was survival, raw and urgent. "I need answers," Daniel said, his voice low, carrying the weight of days spent in doubt and fear. "Everything, no more half-truths." Mara froze, the tray of glasses trembling in her hands. "Daniel, please," she said softly, but her tone carried a tension he had never heard before. The calm veneer of their home felt fragile, like glass about to shatter. He stepped closer, heart pounding, scanning the room. The rain outside beat steadily against the windows, punctuating the silence between them. Every detail, the way the knives were arranged, the scattered papers, the half-open letters, felt charged with meaning. The ordinary domesticity was gone, replaced by an undercurrent of danger he could not ignore. Daniel's eyes fell on a photograph lying face down on the counter, Mara and Evan smiling in front of his workplace. He picked it up, fingers trembling, remembering the message from Evan. Tonight, all threads would converge, all lies would meet the harsh light of truth. "You knew he was in my life," Daniel said, voice rising despite his attempts at control. "All of this, all the letters, the names, the hidden histories. Why didn't you tell me?" Mara set the tray down, hands shaking slightly now. "I didn't tell you because I didn't want to lose you," she said, voice breaking. "I tried to protect you from him, from my past, from what I couldn't control." Daniel took a deep breath, the room spinning slightly. He wanted to understand, to forgive, but the revelation of secrets layered over years of carefully constructed love made that impossible. Every heartbeat seemed louder, every shadow a threat. A sudden noise, a floorboard creaking, made him freeze. Mara turned sharply, eyes wide. Daniel's gaze followed, and he saw it, a drawer slightly ajar, papers spilling onto the floor. He bent to retrieve them, discovering receipts, letters, and documents that mapped a network he could barely comprehend. The room felt alive with secrets, vibrating with consequences that had waited patiently for his discovery. The tension broke in a single electric moment. Mara lunged for the papers, desperation in her movements, while Daniel instinctively grabbed her wrists to stop her. The struggle was brief but charged, their breaths ragged, eyes locked. In that instant, the house transformed. Walls that had once held comfort now echoed with fear, betrayal, and the raw presence of danger. Daniel let go, stepping back, hands shaking. Mara stood frozen, staring at him, at the documents, at the life that had been pulled into the open. Neither spoke for long moments. The silence was punctuated only by the rain and their heavy breaths. Outside, the storm intensified, the wind rattling the windows like an ominous drumbeat. Daniel realized then that the home he had thought was safe was no longer a sanctuary. Every room, every object, every shadow bore witness to the collision of secrets and truths. Cliffhanger, Daniel glanced at the counter again and froze. One letter, previously unnoticed, had been opened, its contents visible. The words inside were a direct warning, one that suggested that the danger wasn't just from lies or betrayal, but from someone, or something, watching them closely. The crime scene was no longer a moment. It was a prelude to consequences that would be impossible to escape. The house was quiet now, but Daniel knew the calm was deceptive. Every room seemed to hum with secrets, every object a witness to what had transpired. Mara had retreated to the bedroom, shutting the door softly, leaving Daniel alone with the evidence of lives intertwined, manipulated, and hidden. He picked up the letters again, feeling their weight in his hands, and realized, fully, terrifyingly, that everyone he trusted had lied. It wasn't just Mara. Evan Crawford had orchestrated a network of secrets, letters, and manipulations that Daniel was only beginning to understand. Even the mundane details of their daily life, the carefully timed smiles, the phone calls, the little routines that once seemed harmless, had been strategically crafted to conceal truths. He felt a wave of nausea, thinking that for the past week, he had been nothing more than an observer of a performance meant to deceive him. Daniel tried to reconstruct the web of deception. There were dates, names, and correspondences he had overlooked, each one a thread leading deeper into Mara's hidden past. Friends she had introduced, conversations she had glossed over, even small incidents he had dismissed as trivial, all of it now carried new significance. He realized that the more he uncovered, the more dangerous the situation became. Knowledge, it seemed, carried as much risk as ignorance. He thought back to the moments that had haunted him this week. The phone buzzing with Evan's message, the envelope with the new name, the photographs. The subtle manipulations in Mara's voice and gestures. Each event, each carefully orchestrated omission, formed a pattern he couldn't ignore. And yet, understanding it didn't make him safer. It made him painfully aware of how little control he truly had. The most unsettling realization was that Mara herself had not been entirely free. She had lied, yes, but she had also been bound by a network of obligations, threats, and promises that were bigger than either of them. Fear and survival had shaped her strategies, her secrets, her half-truths. Daniel saw now that betrayal was not always simple or malicious. Sometimes it was necessary, sometimes it was instinct. Despite this understanding, anger and hurt surged through him. The intimacy he had believed in, the love he had trusted, was layered with deceit. Daniel felt the sting of isolation, the realization that he was alone in knowing the full extent of the web, and that every interaction carried layers of unspoken tension. Even silence became suspect, every pause a calculated measure to protect secrets. The rain outside had softened into a dull drizzle, but the storm inside Daniel only intensified. He realized he could not trust anyone entirely, and perhaps never had. Even now, Mara's footsteps in the bedroom, soft but deliberate, reminded him that appearances could never be trusted. The house was no longer a home. It was a theater, and he was both participant and audience, caught in a drama with stakes he could scarcely imagine. Daniel's thoughts raced, trying to plan his next move, to determine which lies to confront and which to leave unspoken. But he understood one truth with absolute clarity. The moment of reckoning was approaching. Every secret revealed, every manipulation uncovered, led inevitably toward a confrontation he could not avoid. Cliffhanger. As he gathered the letters and photographs once more, his phone buzzed. A single message appeared, its sender unknown. "You've seen too much. One wrong move and it all ends." Daniel felt a chill that ran to his bones. The lies were no longer abstract. They were alive, dangerous, and closing in. Daniel's hands were clammy as he stepped back into the house, the warning on his phone still echoing in his mind. The words weren't just a threat, they were a verdict. The moment he had crossed the line into truth carried consequences he could not predict. The house, familiar and intimate for so long, now felt like a cage built of shadows and half-truths. Every creak of the floorboard, every flicker of light, reminded him that the cost of knowing could be devastating. He paused at the threshold of the living room, taking in the scattered letters, photographs, and documents. The room was the physical embodiment of a life he hadn't understood, a map of secrets and lies that had been carefully maintained. Each piece he had uncovered revealed a world he had no right to fully grasp, a reality that had existed before him and would likely continue without him. Knowledge had become a burden heavier than he could bear. Mara emerged from the bedroom, her expression taut with tension. She stopped when she saw him, eyes narrowing, hands tightening on the edge of the doorframe. Daniel realized that even in her fear there was calculation. Every gesture, every glance, was part of a careful choreography she had honed over years of survival. The woman he thought he knew was present, but she was no longer entirely accessible. Her past had fused with the present, and he was caught between the two. "I know everything," Daniel said, voice low but unyielding. The letters, Evan, the promises, all of it. He swallowed hard, trying to keep his own trembling in check. "And now I need to know why." Mara's eyes glistened with something he couldn't name, fear, regret, or a mixture of both. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I didn't lie to hurt you. I lied because the world I was part of before you, the people, the debts, the promises, they were dangerous. Revealing them could have destroyed us both." Daniel's chest tightened. Danger, manipulation, love, loyalty, they were all entangled in ways he hadn't anticipated. The weeks of investigation, observation, and sleepless nights had led to this moment. The confrontation, the raw truth laid bare. But understanding the motives didn't lessen the sting of betrayal. Every smile, every tender gesture now carried an unspoken calculus, a cost he hadn't been willing to pay. Mara took a step closer, cautiously, trying to bridge the chasm between them. "I never wanted this for us. I never wanted you to get hurt. But the cost of knowing it changes everything." Her words struck him with clarity. Knowledge was power, yes, but it was also a burden that left scars, a truth that could not be undone. Daniel's gaze shifted to the scattered documents on the table. He realized that by uncovering the secrets, he had entered a world he could not escape. Each revelation brought understanding, but also a deeper sense of vulnerability. The very act of knowing had altered him, reshaped his perceptions, and forced him to confront uncomfortable truths about love, trust, and the human capacity for deception. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the night eerily still. Daniel felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. The choices made in the past, the secrets kept, the lies told, all of them had led to this moment. He understood that relationships, even those built on love, could be fragile, contingent, and profoundly influenced by hidden forces. The cost of knowing was the awareness that innocence no longer existed. Mara stepped closer, extending a hand. "I'm sorry," she said, voice barely above a whisper, "for everything. But we can't undo what's been revealed. We can only face it." Daniel looked at her, the letters, the photographs, the messages, all the fragments of a life reconstructed from deception, and realized the truth. Facing reality meant accepting the cost. Pain, mistrust, fear, and the weight of knowledge were now inescapable companions. Love, if it remained, would be tempered by understanding, hardened by the very truths he had unearthed. Cliffhanger, Daniel exhaled slowly, his mind a whirlwind of fear and clarity. But before he could respond, the front door creaked open, unexpected, unannounced. Outside, the dim glow of a car's headlights illuminated a figure he hadn't seen coming. And in that instant, Daniel understood that the cost of knowing had only just begun.